Welcome to World Economics course, the first actual lecture after the introduction, in which we are going to review the world economy, the performance of the world economy this year, I mean 2021. Of course, the year is not over yet, so especially, partially, of course, our review will be complete for 2020, but partially also we will see some data related to this year, 2020. Well, after this video, the other videos you will see will be recorded, were recorded before this semester. Unless after I watched them, I got the impression I need to re-record them. I will use the videos I have recorded previously. But of course, because every year the indicators change as the world economy, of course, evolves, this video lecture should be taken specifically for every particular year. So let's, well, the report itself is this one, which you can also download from the course page, which you could also download from the World Bank internet site. However, I also have prepared a PowerPoint where I have highlighted the particular graphs I would like to focus on. So now let's look on the PowerPoint. So let's start. Well, always I start this lecture by looking to the growth rates. And this is, here you can see the growth rate, but it doesn't show you the overall growth rate. That's, of course, up to this point. The actual growth rate will be above this amount. But up to this point in 2021, the countries were divided into two different groups. First group is above median vaccination group. The second one is below median vaccination group. And in general, the countries that have where the vaccination rates are higher, the growth rate is close to 2%, while within the countries where vaccination is below the median, it is actually close to 0, maybe 0.23, basically. In advanced countries, this is advanced economies, you can see vaccination increases the growth rate to 2.5, while when the countries are below median, have below median vaccination, in that case, their growth is around 1%. And for EMDEs, actually, even with above median vaccination, you can see the growth rate is still below the advanced the ratio of advanced economies that have low vaccination. Around 1% is the growth rate of above median vaccination countries. And countries that have the emerging economies, countries that are that have below median vaccination rates have actually a slight degrowth, negative growth. I mean, the countries shrink, the economies get smaller. Okay, so well, this is the expected growth rate of whole world in 2021. Let's see first the growth rate in between 2015 and 2019. 2020 is not there, which means actually part of the growth rates in 2021 and 2022 are expected to kind of rebound countries experience after the crisis, created by the pandemic in 2020. Note, both 2021 and 2022 are in gray area. That means they are projections. 2021 is also a projection since the year is not over yet. Well, China has been the greatest contributor to growth between 2015 and 2019. US was coming, well, clearly its contribution was below China, but still it was significant. And emerging countries, excluding China, their effect was larger than the advanced countries, excluding USA. In 2021 and 2022, according to the projections, of course, first, the growth rate is expected to be larger. However, as you can see, now US is expected to contribute significantly more to growth than China. Of course, that's also partially because US is a larger economy, so even a slower growth rate in US has a larger contribution to the global growth rate. If a country like Turkey grows even 100%, that will have a smaller effect compared with US growing, I don't know, 50%, for example. I mean, clearly, a small country, even when it has a large growth rate, its effect on the global economy is smaller. So that doesn't mean the fact that contribution of US is larger doesn't mean that China has a smaller growth rate than US, but it means US is catching up China in terms of growth rate. The same is also true for advanced economies and EMDEs, emerging developing economies, excluding China, in 2021, and also, well, in 2022, their contribution is expected to be more or less the same. Maybe emerging economies, excluding China, will have even larger contribution. Again, this doesn't mean that emerging economies necessarily have a lower growth rate. It depends on the relative sizes of the economies. Although within the emerging markets, there are also significant large economies like India, for example, but also, of course, excluding US, advanced economies also have very large economies. By the way, the red one is advanced economies excluding China. The blue one is USA. That means actually, well, the contribution of the advanced economies is expected to be always larger than the contribution of the developing economies, excluding US and excluding China. And, well, the contribution of US and China are expected to be more or less same, maybe US a little bit more than China. But still, that means the USA has catched up China in terms of contribution. At least the expectations are that way. And the world is expected to grow around well, 5.5%, a little bit more maybe in 2021, and around 4.2% maybe in 2022. Again, these are projections. In terms of fiscal and monetary policies, you can see that within the emerging countries, a significant of them are tightening in terms of fiscal policy. And that's kind of a must, because also some countries, especially when their revenues reduce as a result of shrinkage in the economy, they need to tighten, they need to cut certain programs, they need to increase the revenues, and especially potential debt they can get will be not that much available. But a significant percentage of them is also loosening fiscally. In terms of monetary policy rate, which includes, of course, the interest rate in the financial system, a significant percentage of them is not changing anything in 2021. But there is a small but still an important percent of countries that are tightening, and a smaller percent, half of the group that is tightening there is another group that is approximately half of the size of the group that is tightening, which is actually loosening. That means lowering the interest, basically. This means basically, in general, the overall trend is in emerging and developing economies is to tighten the economy, the fiscal and monetary stance. Of course, this is 2021. To some extent, of course, these countries could have already followed loose, some of them at least may have followed loose policies in 2020. And now they might have to some extent also no option but do some tightening. But of course, again, a significant percentage of developing economies are still loosening, both fiscally and monetarily. These are per capita income growth relative to advanced economies. These are all emerging and developing economies. And these are all emerging and developing economies, excluding China. These are low-income countries and fragile low-income countries and small states. Between 2000 and 2019, you can see that emerging economies in general, and even low-income countries and emerging economies except China, were expecting a higher per capita income growth compared with the advanced economies. Though most of that increase is due to China, as you can see. But fragile economies, they actually experience a smaller per capita income growth. And especially when we include, well, China has still a relatively higher per capita income growth relative to advanced economies. But as you see, all other emerging and developing economies, on average, not all other, of course, there can be some examples that are contrary, but on average, emerging and developing economies experience a lower per capita income growth compared with advanced economies, and that might also be a negative growth. And this effect is much larger in case of low income and fragile low income countries. Now, savings and debt, which is a critical thing, because especially when economic crisis hits, especially countries might need to get some debt, but also people and companies, private sector, might also need to get some debt as much as possible to survive. And as you see, well, first thing you can see is out of the savings, out of the disposable income, the savings has increased significantly. It is much larger than the projections. Of course, this relative increase compared with the projection is much more significant in case of advanced economies. It's relatively less significant in case of the developing economies. That's because people there might not have that much option because they might need to spend in order to survive socially in those countries. But still, there is a visible increase compared with the pre-pandemic projection. That saving could be useful. It can be directed to the investment. However, in the short run, when this could be more difficult, the increase in savings might also create some degrowth, decrease in the output level. And as you see, the debt, well, this green line is a 2019 level. This is the orange mark is the 2007 level. So there is a significant increase in both government and private debt, but especially private debt in 2020, as you can see. It doesn't look that much compared with the overall stock, but when you consider it's just an increase in 1 year, it's still a very significant increase. And these are EMDE, developing countries account, fiscal, current account and fiscal account balances. A significant percentage of them were positive. For example, this is East Asia, which was positive in 2007 in terms of current account, although it was negative in terms of fiscal account. Fiscal is government, current account is international balance. MENA was, this is Middle East and North Africa, positive at 2007. It was also positive in terms of the current account. This is Sub-Saharan Africa, for example. This is SAR is South Asia. You can see now all of them are. For example, Sub-Saharan Africa was positive in terms of fiscal account, and South Asia was positive in terms of the current account. But now all of them are negative, some more severely than the others, but all of them are negative in terms of both current and fiscal accounts. And these are the advanced economies. Advanced economies in general, advanced economies have government debt that was, I mean, this is the total government debt, basically, not the increase of it. It is in general around 80% of GDP, but it has increased to in 2019, and now it has increased to around 100. And in the United States, it is increased around from 140 to 160% of the GDP. That means if USA use all of its income as a nation to pay debt, it needs 1.5 years to pay its debt. And this is a current account balance in Euro area and the United States. United States was slightly better in 1990s, and it has become even positive. But since in this millennia, United States was always bad, worse than Euro. And especially in 2020, it has decreased significantly. It is expected to be better, but note again, the gray area is projection. Basically, here it is projection. And here it means crisis, basically, at the upper graphic means crisis. And it also shows when actually government debt has increased, has increased significantly. So global trade. The graph on the left side shows how impact of $1 increase will affect demand for imports. As you see, especially for the durables, which can be stored, of course, the effect of $1 increase is about 3%. I mean, very significant. For non-durables, it is, I mean, those perish, you cannot store them, or they last less. The effect is small, somewhat smaller, but still significant. I mean, more than $2 per dollar increase in costs. Services, the effect on services is relatively small, but services are imported relatively less in current world economy, and because they, I mean, already their imports might only come to place in relatively more essential cases. The effect of cost increases might be smaller there. And as you see, there's a very significant increase in especially container shipping rates, but also a significant increase in the delivery times after the mid-2020. So that means there is a significant increase of cost of trade, international trade in the world, which is expected to affect the demand for imports, basically. And in general, you can also see there is a very significant increase in commodity prices. Well, actually, there was a deflation in 2020, but in the first half of 2021, the prices have come back to their, all prices have come back to their 2019 levels. And actually, metals and agricultural prices and metal prices have exceeded that level. And now metals, their price is even 50% higher than the 2019 level. And you can see throughout 2019, the prices remain more or less constant. So this increase is, I mean, it is not a trend that can be traced back to 2019 at least. And you can see input prices and output prices, especially input prices are increasing significantly. Output prices are relatively smaller. That means, of course, the companies that are selling those outputs, they are actually, their profit rates are getting smaller. Of course, I don't know whether this input prices includes the wages, so the wages might also get, maybe they might be decreasing to some extent. But even if the wages are remaining constant, the workers are also actually getting less with their income. Because even if the wage rate is the same, the output prices are also increasing, which means actually the amount we can buy gets smaller. Of course, someone needs to be getting benefit of this increase, and those group is probably the companies that are producing the industrial inputs. They are actually experiencing a maybe larger increase in their revenues, especially if the wages remain constant, basically, since that's also a cost for them. Inflation is always a redistribution of income, unless there is an increase in real costs. It redistributes income between different groups. It might redistribute income between the capital, the companies, and the workers. It might also redistribute income between the companies, basically. And here you can see contributions to the growth or degrowth. Well, consumption is the most important contributor to the growth. And in the first half of 2020, it has actually created the degrowth. It has kind of come back in the second half of 2020, and in the first half of 2021, it is the major contributor to the growth again. Investments remained positive throughout the pandemic period, and they had contributed to growth in second half of 2022 more than consumption. although it still contributes to the growth and it has increased basically, but its contribution is relatively less. And exports also have an increasing effect in their contribution to the growth. Actually, in the first half of 2020, they had contributed to degrowth, basically. Per capita growth, these are the emerging economies. Well, you can see that in 2020, there is almost a 3% decrease after 2% increase in 2019. So basically everything that is taken in 2019 is taken back in 2020. But in 2021, emerging economies expected to grow a lot. But the low-income countries, they are not expected to grow that much. The non-low-income emerging economies are expected to grow a lot, almost close to, actually more than 5% in 2021. Low-income countries also expected to grow to some extent in 2022. But again, the growth of emerging and developing economies is expected to be more in 2022. Poverty. Extreme poverty and multidimensional poverty. The second one includes the time poverty and poverty created by the lack of infrastructure, for example. It doesn't include only the poverty created by low income. For example, you might still earn a lot of income, but there might not be clean water in your area. That might also contribute to poverty, especially if your extra income cannot make up for this lack of water. And by the end of 2021, poverty is expected to increase by 100 million. South Asia is the highest contributor, is expected to be highest contributor to that increase, almost 50 million. When you include multidimensional poverty, that becomes 100 million. Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to contribute around 25 million and around 50 million to the multidimensional poverty and around 25 million to the extreme poverty. And also other emerging economies, they also expected to contribute to poverty, but less than other developing countries, but still significant contribution. I mean, this is increased. So unfortunately, in 2021, by the end of 2021, compared with the beginning of the pandemic, poverty, number of people who are in poverty is expected to increase and decrease. Note that this is expected poverty, so this doesn't include everyone below the poverty line. But I mean, this is calculated by taking, for example, people who are below the hunger line or below a certain percentage of the poverty line, basically. Employment decreases created by the pandemic in 2020. Well, in general, the ratio is around 3.5%. A significant decrease was experienced in hotels and catering, which also, of course, hit the northern Cyprus and southern Cyprus also significantly. Trade is also a sector that is hit a lot. Health and construction are hit relatively less, as you might expect from them. So the countries that are focusing on these two are hit harder, basically, by the pandemic. And now we will look to some regional data. We start with East Asia. You can see China. Well, even during the pandemic, China has grown, although it's around 2%. I mean, even in 2020. In 2021, its growth is expected to rise to 8%, a huge growth rate. And in 2022, it is expected to decrease, but only to 5-6%. I mean, still a very large growth rate for a yearly growth, basically. And this is a real increase in the income of the average Chinese people. East Asia, excluding China, has actually experienced a degrowth around 4%. They are expected to grow back, but relatively more modestly in 2021, around 4%, half of Chinese growth rate. But in 2022, they are expected to catch up China in terms of growth. And this is the output gap. Basically, you can see 2019, I'm sorry. In that year, all countries had a negative output gap. That means basically output was more than the potential output. Now all of them are experiencing, even China, which has grown, is experiencing a positive output gap. You must say it seems negative because actually they mention it in a reverse way. So negative here means that those countries, the output actual output they have is less than the potential. And even at the end of 2021, it is expected to be less. As some countries like Thailand and Philippines is expected to actually, and Indonesia is expected to show little progress in closing this output. Well, some countries for which the expectations are relatively low are so because the pandemic is still going on in those countries more severely, basically. Okay, now debt. This is Mongolia. And some countries are small countries, but from large ones, this is Vietnam, Malaysia, China, Philippines, basically. And especially in Mongolia and then China and Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, you can see the debt is very large. But in China, almost all of the debt is domestic debt, so they are getting it from the internal borrowers. In Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Thailand, you can see domestic debt is still significant, but they also have a significant external debt. In Mongolia, most of the debt is external. So that means international conditions are actually might force Mongolia. But in case of China, I mean, they might still have some room for international borrowing internationally. Although that itself might create some instability compared with the already large domestic debt they have. So maybe it would be better for China to decrease the overall debt level before starting to borrow from international borrowers. But this means the debt is a significant problem in whole Asia also, in addition to other economies, especially advanced countries. So contribution to forecast revisions, this is Europe and Central Asia. And these are contributions to the revisions. Revisions means, this means the countries have grown less than expected. And a very significant revision is done due to Turkey. So Turkey has grown significantly less, actually shrinked in 2020, I guess. Russian Federation also has contributed significantly. Central Europe has contributed significantly, and they and Russia will still be expected to contribute significantly in 2021. Turkey still will contribute a sizable amount to revisions in 2021, but relatively less than Russia and Central European economies. And these are GDP growth in East Europe and Central Asian countries. This is the whole region. And as you see, the overall growth rate was negative in 2020 and in 2021 and 2023. It's expected to be around 3%, basically. The rate is significantly less than China and even East Asia, excluding China, basically. Although excluding China, the rate is relatively closer. And these are this is the inflation rate. You can see it, as you can see, the largest deviation from inflation target. The orange one is the target, green one is the upper target. I mean, not the central target, but highest allowable target that is set. And as you see, there is a huge deviation from the target. It was almost double, more than double, even the upper target. Other countries also expected high inflation, Tajikistan, although still much less than Turkish inflation. Although there, the deviation from target is much more moderate, basically, even for the countries that experienced high inflation. So this is a significant case in Turkey. As I said, inflation sometimes is created by the real increase in costs, but in other cases, it's also a redistribution of income. Turkey is likely to experience both of them. Change in employment. This is Latin America. And here, this is the most highlighted problem created by the pandemic. Actually, there are even cases, further damage to the labor force created by lost school days there, which is very significant for Latin America, basically. As you see in major Latin American countries, Peru and Brazil and even Colombia and Chile, you can see a very significant change in employment. Even Mexico, 5% is significant, but Brazil, for informal employment, it's 20%, a huge decrease. Peru, 15% for informal employment, around 13% for formal employment, very large still. So especially informal sectors in Brazil, Peru, and Chile are hit hard. And those are especially low-income people. That means, there's a significant crisis. And that might also create everlasting effects in lost on skills and also, to some extent, ability to find employment in those countries. And here you can see the volatility, the continuous fluctuations in Latin America in general. Latin America has grown 4% since, the beginning of 20th century, but it always has this large up and down swings. And you can also see, the downswing in 2020, and it somehow has gone up again, although still didn't make up the downswing created by the pandemic. And you can see the depth in Latin America also. It's in terms of percentage of GDP, it's significantly less than advanced economy, many advanced economies at USA. Although you can see there are also significant deviations between the country, but even the highest ones are relatively. And these are projections. The 2021 is projection. 2020 is not a projection. But even the highest one is 90%. But of course, those countries' ability to borrow is less than advanced economies and even many East Asian economies, which means the existing debt might still restrict them. Now we come to Middle East and North African countries. You can see GDP growth, which has been very small in 2019 also. In 2020, it has been around 4% degrowth. In 2021 and 2022, it is expected to come back, though it is less significant. I mean, 2% in 2021 and less than 4% in 2022. The comeback is expected to be less. Oil exporters are importers are relatively better than oil exporters, although relatively better than oil exporters, although that difference is not huge, but they are not that good, basically. Especially oil exporters, they experience a very little growth in 2019 even. And that's basically because the decrease in the oil prices, as you see, and which can be traced back to the 2018. Oil prices are expected to, well, they might increase again in 2021, but still, I mean, the ratio is still very low compared with the 2018 rate even. Well, and you can see in overall Middle East and North African countries compared with average of emerging economies, the countries are, of course, there are also very rich countries in MENA, like Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They pull it up, but the average is larger than the overall developing countries, though the difference is decreasing. And note also, the oil exporters are the relatively rich countries mostly. The difference between oil exporters and oil importers within the MENA is also decreasing. And these are contributions to growth. As you see, net exports have been negative. Private consumption has contributed in 2019. Now, in 2020, exports have contributed positively. Probably also because net exports also include the effect of imports. If imports decrease as a result of recession, net exports might turn positive and contribute. Although investment and private consumption both have decreased, and then you can see the biggest contribution is still consumption. It's expected to be consumption, although investments and exports still expect to contribute significantly in coming years, including the second half of this year. Now, South Asia. This includes this region includes, as you can see below, countries like India, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, basically. GDP growth in those countries have been negative 5% in 2020. And actually, when you exclude India, it has been relatively positive. So India is hit harder, probably also because of the increasing cases in 2020. India has been relatively good in first months of pandemic, but then in the second half of 2020, it was hit harder by the pandemic. As you can see, however, when we include India, the region is expected to come back at a growth rate around 6%, although when you exclude India, the comeback is much more smaller. I mean, India is expected to bounce back fast in 2021. When you look to the contributions, you can see, well, private consumption was the main contributor, although fixed investments was also significant. The exports was contributing negatively. It has contributed positively in 2020, but its contribution is expected to be negative in 2021 and 2022. Private consumption is still significant. Government expenditures effect has increased, but fixed investments also expected to contribute significantly in the region. And this is the fiscal balance. It was negative. It has turned more negative, basically, and you can see, especially the worst country is doing much worse than it was doing before. It somehow, the region somehow is expected to improve in terms of its fiscal balance, but still its effect will be, fiscal balance still will be significantly negative, more negative than any year between 2015 and 2019, even in 2023, according to projections. Now we can go to, we look to Sub-Saharan Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, as you can see in the graph below, Nigeria and South Africa especially experience a significant degrowth, not as a result of only pandemic, but they experience a degrowth since mid-2010s, basically. Rest of the Africa has experienced a growth in the second half of 2010s. It has experienced a relatively decrease, but it is expected to come back in 2021, though the Nigeria and South Africa are not expected to come back. And here you can see the South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa in general. As you see, the depression has been relatively more moderate compared with the rest of the world. Although the comeback is also very moderate. Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa has experienced a much more significant decrease in their output level in 2020. They experienced somewhat a comeback in 2021 and 2022. You can see industrial commodity exporters are also doing not that good, although not as bad as these three countries. And other SSAs, Sub-Saharan African countries, are relatively good. Actually, they even did not experience a depression, just a stagnation during the pandemic. So this is the end of our overview to the world economy. You can see more in the much more in the report. And actually, your first report assignment is on this report. Also, your first discussion will be on the report. Basically, you are expected to look to the effect of coronavirus on the world economy. You should read the report that we have covered and write the most important economic effect you think pandemic had at the world economy, and write why you think this way. And you should also write the long-term consequences of the effect you have mentioned. And you are always welcome to bring additional resources, articles, news pieces, even videos, anything you like to. So this is the end of this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And as always, I also wish that you will remain healthy.